So for now, what I'm kind of doing is I'm using FreeMind, which is a mind mapping program, and so let me just kind of go through that. And it works so much better if I actually named it before I save it next time. So let's go ahead and do that real quick, because losing things is never fun, especially when you're going to Mars. So call this the Mars book. FreeMind, and I'm going to show some kind of a screen capture of this later, of kind of how this works. But instead of writing as paragraphs and moving things around like that, FreeMind uses kind of a bubble approach. So it's all, you'd have a bubble and then you'd link it to other bubbles, and then from sub bubbles, and you can kind of do branches and so on. And then what's kind of cool about it is you can open and close branches at will and move things into or out of branches. So for instance, one of the things that I was thinking of early on, I was like, okay, I need to figure out my crew, who's going to Mars and how are they gonna, see, it's like I was kind of thinking, okay, how are we getting there? Who's going? Why are they going? Are they planning on coming back, or is this a permanent Mars expedition? Or is this going to be like, what would be the word? Like a settlement, it's like, the Mayflower. When they got to the New World, they weren't planning on going back, so that was a one-way mission, essentially. And so if you look at them, they're like, they got there, they planted, they expected to grow food, there was, the ability to hunt, which, as far as I know, there's no wildlife on Mars yet, so that would be an issue. But it's conceivable that you could grow your own food in hydroponics type setups and so on. And there's a lot of sci-fi involved there, but it's something that NASA is working on. They're growing some small food on the International Space Station. It's probably, I think, just bean sprouts right now, or possibly lettuce or something like that. But it's it's possible. And so it would be not a huge stretch to figure, okay, we could fly to Mars, and in the year it takes to get there, or whatever the flight time frame is. I think it's 9 months to get to Mars, if I remember right. So if you launched with enough food to get to Mars, you would have eaten it all by the time you got there. So you better figure out a way to grow your own food on the flight and not eat your seeds before you get there, kind of a thing. So you get to Mars, and then you have to build a colony on Mars. Maybe you'd live in orbit for a while in your spaceship until you had the colony built, and then you'd have to come out of orbit, back down. And there's, one idea that I had was, well, if you've already used the space elevator to get to orbit from the Earth, it would make as much sense to go ahead and set up a space elevator from Mars orbit back down to the Earth. It seems simple enough as opposed to dropping in the giant beach ball and bouncing around and landing in a crater somewhere, which sounds like fun until you actually have to do it, and that sounds kind of scary then. So it's like you kind of got to work backwards. You're like, okay, how many people do you need on Mars first to make a colony? So now I'm looking at questions like genetic pool. From a biological point of view, how many people do you need to start up your basic, think of it like, the Noah's Ark question. How many families do you need, and how much biodiversity do you need not to have inbreeding problems, and enough there's a word for that, and I can't think of it right now. Genetic diversity, I think, is the word I'm trying to find. So you got to answer these questions. So you're like, okay, you figure, okay, maybe we need 50 families or 50 couples or something like that. And then you got to figure, if you're flying for 9 months, the people that you started off with are probably not going to be couples when you get there, because you're all flying in a little tiny spaceship. This isn't going to be like Battlestar Galactica where you got this huge spaceship. This is, and we're not in Star Trek yet. We're talking about, flying. I'm kind of thinking of talking to people that I used to know in the Navy who were in submarines. And you're like, okay, so you take 150 people and you put them in a submarine, and you don't get fresh air for the next 6 months. That's going to be pretty close to the experience, I think. yes, you can look out the window. That's the only thing that, the Mars mission will have that the submarine doesn't have, because there's no windows on submarines, not the military ones. And once you're underwater, there's nothing to see anyway. So, what's it going to be like for normal people, not astronauts, but normal people, for them to be on a spacecraft that's not very big, there's not a lot of room to move around, and you're in there with a lot of people because we're going to have to build this just barely big enough to get there. Otherwise it's going to cost so much you'll never get there, right? So it's got to be just barely enough. It'd be like if you've ever gone with your family and you've gone camping and you expected to be able to go out and play in the park, and you were planning on everybody having tents and everything, and then it rains all weekend, so you're all jammed in the camper and it's raining and everybody's wet and the windows are fogged up. That's going to be the trip to Mars for the 9 months. And you're just ready to kill each other when you get there. So this is the thing we got to think about. Different personalities. You're going to have a lot of geeky people. You need flight engineers and people like this that are scientists and really, really smart, but they probably aren't really good interpersonal people. So how do we deal with that? If we're looking at a permanent colony, we need young families. We need college-age kids that are going to be growing up with us. We're going to need, there's probably going to be people bringing maybe small kids, or on a 9-month flight, odds are we're going to have people having kids by the time we get there. That's, realistic. You're not going to just say, no, we're not going to have kids for the next 10 years. That's going to be hard to enforce. So we got to deal with that.